Twelk the hunter looked at Alita, and then at the portal at the far side of the vast hall. She, too, knew it was their one chance of getting home again. The fog that rolled out of the portal had left stones in the fortress slick with dew, so the two of them approached it with caution. According to what the avatar at the oracle had said, Ulrich would be here, and he would be unbeatable without the aid of a spellcaster. That is why, as a sinister form began to take shape within the eldritch mists of the portal, Twelk's trepidation grew. He slowly drew the magic arrow from his quiver and glanced sideways at the Amazon. Alita's eyes were fixed on the portal and the terror within. They could now discern the immense stature of the Rakshasa as it stepped through the vapors. It was Ulrich. As the Tiger Man's pale eyes narrowed on the two adventurers, he sneered. He would enjoy eviscerating these foolish humans and dining upon their entrails. But before he could pounce upon his victims, an unseen force left him suspended in mid-lip. It seemed that Twelk and Alita were equally stunned. "Now, my friends, strike now!" It was the voice of Brannig, whom they believed had been killed in the ruins south of the Oracle. Twelk stammered, "You can't keep a good mage down." Brannig replied to their unvoiced question, "But magic will only keep Ulrich immobile a few seconds more. Now, be quick!" Welcome to Talengarde, a world of fantasy and adventure, heroes and quests, magic and chance. This game features a customizable playing area, numerous beings, and dozens of secret objectives and plot twists, ensuring hours of fascination and thousands of game scenarios. And, unlike many role-playing games, Talengarde does not require a game master. It includes everything you need to start your adventures. And I just read the entirety of the back of the box. This is Talengarde, an epic fantasy adventure game. There is a somewhat funny story as to how I became aware of this game. I was looking for a cool fantasy board game several months back. It was last year, if I remember correctly. And I noticed all of these cool fantasy board games, but they were quite new school, with those images, that art that remind you of World of Warcraft, more high fantasy, more over the top, but I think you can be over the top while remaining classic fantasy in the aesthetic sense. So I was thinking, are there still board games that retain that sort of old school classic fantasy flavor? Because, for example, even though Hero Quest has been resurrected, it still has that sort of a new school fantasy look to it. Now I'm going to tell you how I found out about Talengarde in a few moments, because now I want to talk about this channel's sponsor, Heroes and Hardships. This is a universal RPG system that will allow you to play any sort of campaign, genre, theme. You will be able to create any sort of character imaginable with hundreds of tools to assist you with that. I'm going to put a few links in the description. One of them will take you to the Kickstarter that should begin in about a month or so. Another one will take you to the website, also to the Tetsubo section of the site, to the Discord, etc. So please check those links out. I'm also going to put links to my review of the Quickstart guide and the Wallace campaign setting based on the life and exploit of William Wallace. So please check it out. Now let's continue. So as I was saying, I was looking for a board game in Amazon, and I just let my intuition, my gamer's instinct guide me, and I typed something like adventure RPG board game. And then I started to see the results, and I stumbled upon Talengarde. I didn't know anything about this board game, but the illustration that looks so 80s, perhaps early 90s, it kind of looks like an old PC game, you know, those first-person RPGs, kind of like Might and Magic or perhaps Wizardry. Not exactly, but it reminded me of that. And the blurb or the information in Amazon didn't tell me too much about the game, but I had this feeling that it was very valuable. So I checked out the price, it was 40 bucks. And because there were only 3 remaining, I went for it. I followed my instinct and I decided to purchase it. So once the order was set and it was on its way to being packaged and sent, I decided to look for more information, perhaps some reviews. I was a bit nervous, perhaps I was wasting $40, and I started to look for reviews, and there were none. I think there was a single review, but you know those reviews that don't tell you anything about the game? Something like, oh, the game is very fun, it's a fantasy adventure game, you obtain treasure and kill monsters, and it was something like that. It was the only review that I found back then, after searching and searching for about 1 hour or so. But then I started to look for it in other stores. I went back to Amazon just because I was curious to see how fast this thing sold out, if it actually sold out at all, and it was gone. People got their hands on it insanely fast. So it turns out that this game is actually quite rare and sometimes quite expensive. I just saw it on eBay a few days ago and it was between 300 and 600. There were 2 listings and one was sold at $300 and another one was at $600. So it was pretty lucky that I became aware of Talengarde's existence and that I followed my intuition, my instinct to purchase it. So in this part 1 of the review, I am going to focus on the components of the game. Let's take a look at the box first. It's not exactly the sturdiest box, but I have seen worse, much worse. It's a sort of soft cardboard. It's not as fragile as you would think. I think it will last you a long time if you take good care of it. This game was created in 1995 in Utah, Salt Lake City. So the box itself, I don't think it will break down anytime soon, but there are already some scuff marks. Therefore it will be durable, but it will show wear and tear throughout the years. Now I love the cover art and the font, the typography of the logo. It's amazing. It feels, like I said, like an old school video game like Might and Magic, Wizardry, that sort of style. It's so flavorful, masculine and feminine at the same time. As you can see in the cover, you see this warrior. He looks kind of like a fantasy Native American warrior with that Amazon fighting against that Rakshasa that I mentioned at the beginning, and with the wizard coming to help them, paralyzing the monster so that they can finish him off. So the cover looks quite sexy, quite magical, very 80s and 90s fantasy at its peak. So truly amazing. And at the back of the box you have some information that I read to you at the start, and the side of the box is pretty normal, as you can appreciate from the image. Now let's move on to the other components. First, the rulebook. Wow, this rulebook is really fragile. This is the, I wouldn't say the lowest quality paper, but it's just decent. And because, like I said, this is from 1995, it's already quite yellowish. You can't really tell from the images, but you really have to be careful with this rulebook. Inside, it looks a bit more complex than the game actually is. There is a bit of complexity, just a bit, with tables and different effects, covering all sorts of circumstances. However, there can be a few moments where situations will arise that are not entirely covered in the rulebook. This is because of the complexity of the board game. So it kinda feels like a role-playing game at times. You will have to make some judgment calls or rulings, especially when it comes to the interactions of certain magical items and spells and such. But overall, I think the rulebook does its work, does its job. And although I am giving you a few glimpses of the components, in the next parts of this review, I am also going to show you more images or close-ups of different cards and such. Now moving on to the cards, The card stock is also pretty, not entirely disappointing, but it's like the softest cardboard or card that you can imagine, cardstock, or perhaps the thickest paper just before turning into card material or cardstock. They are really fragile. These cards, they are going to rip apart. And just take a look at the insert, the cardboard insert. It is quite fragile. They recommend that you place the cards inside of the slots, but when I started to insert the cards, a bit of the insert ripped apart. You can notice that in the corner. And the cards themselves, they start to get dog-eared. The edges are going to be a bit ruined if you keep storing them or placing them in these slots. So I am not using the insert anymore. Now, when it comes to the art of the cards, on the back, it's pretty simple. You just have words indicating the categories of each of the piles of cards. But I love the art. I can already imagine these images as pixel art, like I said in all of those old school dungeon crawlers or fantasy games. They also appear in some manuals or strategy guides, so it's truly a blast from the past. You feel as if you are being transported back to the birth of fantasy gaming. So I really love the art. There are also a few soft card cheats to mark different events, enemies, because things will happen throughout the course of the game that associate different, like I said, events or happenings to specific players, and you have colors to link a player to a certain enemy, to a certain perhaps encounter related to a quest and such. You also have cheats to indicate money, wounds, different effects such as poison, some sort of boon or modifier to your attributes. You also have dice and these little peons, you would call them, I think, or plastic pieces. They are quite featureless, as you can see. They kind of look like those pieces that you purchase in the $1 store, but they serve their purpose. You also have these, like I said, soft card pieces that represent villages, crypts, mausoleums, caverns, stables, different shops, bridges that will save you a lot of time instead of swimming. You also have the map pieces. These different pieces can be arranged in different ways, so that the game world feels completely different with each session. And those are the components. I can't wait to talk about the gameplay. The gameplay is it is somewhat fiddly, but if you go beyond the fiddliness, or if you are like me and you actually enjoy the fiddliness sometimes, this is truly a magical, amazing retro fantasy experience. So this concludes this part of the review. The components are quite subpar, as I have mentioned, but they have a charm to them. Aesthetically, when it comes to the illustrations, the colors, the style, they are perfect. It's just that the stock is not the best one. I am really thinking about, I should be thinking about sleeving the cards. I don't know why I haven't done so yet. Perhaps it's because the feel, the way that it feels on your fingers, because it's like I said, somewhat soft material for a card. It feels really nice, like you're playing. Perhaps it takes me back, it's because of the nostalgia. It takes me back to those old board games. I remember playing my first version of, it was the Mexican version of the Dungeon board game. And it also had these little cards that ripped apart so easily. So every time I touch these cards, it reminds me of that first fantasy board game, Calabozo as we call it here in Mexico. So Talengarde it's such a magical time-traveling experience. As we go through the gameplay with the next parts of this review, I'll let you decide if you think that I am a bit biased when it comes to how this game proceeds or moves forward. Maybe you will think, oh, Talengarde isn't so special, or maybe you will think, wow, Talengarde is truly a hidden gem. So thank you for watching this part of the review. If you have any comments or questions, please let me know. I'm also quite curious to know if any of you was actually aware of Talengarde's existence, please let me know in the comments. And thank you so much to those of you that have been going the extra mile to support this channel. If anyone else wishes to further support the channel, you can send an Amazon gift card or a drive-thru RPG gift certificate. The information on how to do that will be in the description below. Once again, thank you, and see you later.